Hey guys, yeah, it's been 2 days now since I got my last video out. I'm really sorry it's taken me so long, but I'm starting to realize that even in a COVID-19 world, there's still real life that we have to do. And I'm also realizing that I'm never going to get a short video pulled together. So, yeah, this is going to be a big behemoth. I'm going to try doing the same thing that I did with the previous video of do a long one first and then do some shorter ones that just focus in on ideas that I find important from this one. Um, that said, everything in this I find important. I just will try to narrow it down as time goes on. So what I will try to do with this is put timestamps into the details below so that the contents will have little timestamps down there so you guys can hop along as you see fit. So we'll start with a quick recap, move on to the problem itself, which is the pandemic that we're facing, some details on the virus, what it is, what it can do, how we can deal with those aspects. Then the R-naught factor. It's really not as complicated as it always seems to be made out to be in the media, and it is something important for us to understand because that is the way that we measure how effective our steps are in combating this pandemic. We can make that number change. Pandemic response, it's an equation. What I mean by that is all the facets of our response add together to one final response. So if we are lacking in one arm of that equation, the other sides need to take up the slack for the overall response to have the same effectiveness. We'll get into a lot more detail there too. The real problem, if we're being honest about it, and we will get to that, there has been a certain amount of bouncing back and forth through Western, or from Western governments. I tend to think that some of this is to avoid public relations scandals and embarrassment, and I find it very unfortunate because I think that if we were being honest about the problems, the public would be on board. The situation that we're facing, I put unfortunately there, and we'll get into why that is unfortunately the case. This is not going to be a doom and gloom video. There are definitely things we can do to combat this, and like I say over and over again, they're not as complicated as they seem. Once we get everyone on board, we can definitely deal with this problem. It's the getting people on board that's going to take a while. So the public response, it is not too late. We can do this if we work together. And life in a COVID world. So 3 steps to live by. I'm sure there's actually more than that, but the 3 main steps that we've actually discussed before in previous videos are really the way to start dealing with this situation. So to start our recap, like we did with last one, we're just going to take a quick look over at worldometers. As I said, it's been 2 days, so if any of you are out there watching these videos back to back, you'll see that it's been quite a jump in the last 48 hours. I'll get into a ton more detail about this site, the features that we can use here, and the dangers of looking at the numbers and trying to make comparisons. That will all be in video 3, where we are now. But for now, let's get back to the recap of video 1. So we looked at a few different ideas in that one. Here's some of the highlights. The concept that the virus doesn't spread, that people spread the virus. This is not a living organism in the sense of it having the ability to move, the ability to think, anything like that. It's more a living organism in the sense of a seed. Seeds are taken around by other animals in nature. They are not able to move on their own. Asymptomatic spread is a very serious problem, and face masks are part of the solution to that problem. Now, I may not have been clear enough in my previous videos. Face masks are not 100% of the solution. but they are able to help us deal with a large part of that problem, especially if they are used mindfully. So if we're making sure that when we cough, sneeze, are in any sort of those situations, we remove said face mask and put on a fresh one. These are something that, as I said before, we all need to have, and we all need to have multiples. This situation turns many of our usual strengths into weaknesses, and we discussed that quite a bit in the last video. That there's a lot of things that we normally do instinctively that we have to think twice on in this situation, because this is a situation where togetherness and strength in numbers really does not work for us in the same way it normally does. And finally, there's only two teams. There's Team Humanity and Team Virus, and every decision we make falls onto one of those teams, so we have to make sure that we're mindful with our decisions and that we are playing for Team Humanity at all times. So I'd like to, before we really start, throw a new concept up here. So I've got a new tongue twister for everyone, that the proper pandemic preparedness requires the precautionary principle. The precautionary principle is something that's well known in epidemic preparedness. It's something that the guys over at Peak Prosperity, Chris Matherston, have been talking about right since the beginning. And it simply makes sense when we're in a situation where we don't have enough information because this is a new virus. We are duty bound to take all precautions possible. So we should always be working with the worst possible outcome as the one that we prepare for. I've added a couple more little math equations here. That a properly informed public is not equal to panic. A properly informed public is equal to reaction. That right now our governments are working with this one, which I think is a false equation. That if we gave the public the full overview of the problem here, that it would result in panic. I think that because we're not giving the full overview, that's what's resulting in panic. That's why we get the panic buying, the surge on toilet paper. All of these things are due to limited information and not too much information. If we give the whole picture and explain why each part of the picture is important, then we can get the public on board with the reaction to this. And hopefully I'll be able to help us along in that path on this video. So, let's move over to the problem. We're in a pandemic, and what does that mean? Well, pandemics are first and foremost medical crises. It's a health problem. Secondarily, they're economic crises, because some of the steps that are required to fight pandemics have very definite economic consequences. But that does not change that first and foremost, this is a medical crisis. Number two, this is a global crisis first, local crisis second. That is a rather complicated one because we fight this at a local level, or this is a local level change that we have to make. However, it's because of a global situation, and we are a global society, whether we all like that or not. Everything that happens to every country on this planet right now affects every other one, because we have a global supply chain, we have an interconnected manufacturing system. If one of those dominoes falls, it has serious effects on all of the others. So just because we will naturally have our heads in the news for our local area, because it is a scary thing when we run across infections in our local area, we can't lose track of the overall picture as well. Now, a lot of that overall picture I will be doing in the third video, so we'll get into a lot of that there. And third, to effectively solve this problem, which I honestly believe we can do, we need everyone involved, and that is a global everyone. So if any of you find use in this message and can translate it into any other language, feel free to do so. I'm putting disclaimers into all of my descriptions now of please feel free to hack up these videos, take whatever is important. I don't want any credit, don't need any credit, just get the message out, please. That's what we all need to do right now, because we won't all have the same job, but we'll all have a job to do in this if we want to get it done. So a few quick definitions, just so we're all on the same page here. Epidemic turns into a pandemic, turns into endemic. So epidemic is when we have an outbreak that has a defined epicenter. We know where it came from, and we can work with containment. So that's when China put Wuhan into lockdown, an attempt to contain the original outbreak in one area before it breaks out. It has obviously since broken out, so we're now in a pandemic situation. That's when we have multiple epidemics, and we're no longer able to center the outbreak as starting in one area. This is a global pandemic, so it's made it to pretty close to every country in the world now. And the pandemic stage is usually fought with reduction. So that's what we're doing now with our social distancing, with lockdowns, with the closure of schools. All of this is an attempt at the reduction phase because we're trying to slow the potential for spread of the virus. And again, as we discussed, the virus doesn't spread on its own. It's people that spread it from one person to another. So if we can put space between people using those different tools, then we're able to reduce the spread of the virus. And the endemic phase, that's when the disease has pretty much blanketed any given population. So right now we're looking at the possibility that this will become endemic globally. That would be something similar to our seasonal flu, where it returns year after year, and as it slowly mutates over time, we start to be susceptible to it again because our antibodies that we got from the last infection are not necessarily good for this next infection. Now, normally endemic viruses we fight with vaccines. That's what we've been doing with the flu. But there's now evidence that we could actually be using other methods, because if you look at, I believe it's Hong Kong, it might be Taiwan, it might even be both for that matter. In the process of fighting COVID-19, they've taken steps that include social distancing, face masks, massive work being done to disinfect public spaces regularly, make sure that there is no potential for surface spread, things like that. Now, well, they have not yet fully eradicated COVID-19 using these measures. They have definitely got it under control. But what they have basically eradicated is the seasonal flu. We don't normally think of fighting the flu using these type measures, but it turns out it works. From those island nations, they have basically eliminated a virus that we've lived with for many generations. So by the end of this, we might have a whole new toolbox that we can start using on endemic diseases, because we can look at them in a whole different way. Okay, so the virus itself is zoonotic. That means that it came from an animal reservoir. In this case, it looks like the original reservoir was probably bats, and there may have been an intermediate step between bats and humans that we're now looking at a pangolin for. For those of you that don't know what a pangolin is, feel free to Google it, but the nutshell version is a scaly anteater that sometimes lives in trees. They tend to be reasonably warm habitat-dwelling animals. The reason I bring this up is because we have a certain amount of hope that this virus might be susceptible to changes in seasons. If our intermediate animal is a warm temperature animal, then that might not be as likely a situation. And a lot of the current information is unfortunately pointing away from the chance of having a seasonality to this, or at least an extreme seasonality to this. So it's part of the coronavirus family. We've all seen the little pictures of this thing. It looks like a burr. We'll get to that in a bit because it kind of acts like a burr too. It's basically a lipid bubble, so a oil or fat bubble that contains a strand of RNA, inside, and it's got those little kind of hooks that are in tufts that look like crowns, and that's why we call this family coronaviruses. Those little hooks are what connect to the receptors in our lungs. So the virus itself is called SARS-2 coronavirus, found in 2019. The disease is what's COVID-19. Now, in all honesty, we'll get into this a little more in the details of the virus, but we can kind of look at these the same because it's the life cycle, the reproduction cycle of the virus that causes the effects of the disease. It's we're not going to get into extreme detail, but I'll leave some links to some videos and some websites where you can look at it. But for our purposes, we can kind of interchange these two. So the real problem here is not that it's a virus, it's that it's a novel virus or a new virus. So there's no previous data on this. We have no idea of what it can and can't do. We know it's not identical to the previous SARS, but we know that it is from the same family line, if you will. So a useful analog that we were using in the previous video is to think of this as a burr, the type that would get stuck in hair or dog fur or our clothes or something, but a microscopic one. So like I was just saying, the picture looks like a little tiny burr, and this acts a lot like it too. It's not mobile on its own. So we know how to deal with burrs. We can avoid the ones we see, so that would be symptomatic people. We clean up the ones that we can't see and they get stuck to us, so that would be our hand washing, disinfecting of surfaces, all of the general cleanliness rules, and we don't let them get to soil and replicate. So in this particular instance, our burr is looking for soil that is in our lungs and only in our lungs. So if we can keep it out of our lungs, it can't live. So face masks, face masks, face masks. The virus doesn't spread, people spread the virus. So I've written here that no new infection is a win for the virus. It's a mistake made by one of us. This thing's not after us, it's not outthinking us, it's just hitching a ride. So the virus simply doesn't care. It can't, it has no brain. It's just RNA. There's no ability to reason with this, bargain with it, make exceptions with it. We can't cheat. It can't view this as a test. It's not a fight. It's literally just a seed with no brain, and we're carrying it around from place to place. Once we figure out the limitations and advantages that this thing has, then we can really start to get a handle on this. So it can only replicate inside an appropriate host. That's us. Human hosts at the moment are the only hosts that we know of that it's effectively able to infect and replicate in. That could change, of course, and at this point may have. I haven't been able to look at all information, but we can work from the standpoint of if we can keep it out of human lungs, then we can count that as a win. It can only affect the host through one source, the ACE2 receptors. Now, we do have ACE2 receptors in other parts of our body, but the only easy access that this thing has is the ones that exist in our lungs and in the back of our sinus cavity. So it needs to have a host to live long term. Some viruses can live for quite a while. This is not one of those big strong ones. It has a limited ability to survive outside its host. So this is where we have to be concerned with surfaces. Hard, smooth surfaces, 3 to 5 days. Porous surfaces, 24 hours, and if aerosoled, or aerosolized rather, then up to 3 hours. When I do say treat all these as minimums, that's following the precautionary principle that if we know it can do this, assume that it will always be able to do this. It's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared in these situations. Now, this information that I just talked about here is slightly out of line with some of the official information that's going around, especially given the CDC has said that this is not an airborne virus. Now, it's not an airborne virus, but it can move in an aerosolized form if it gets a droplet small enough to be suspended in the air. That droplet, while it's suspended in the air, is able to be blown around by wind currents. We've known a lot of this for a while. So this is the National Institutes of Health. This is from March 17th. This is talking about a study that they did in conjunction with the CDC, UCLA, Princeton University, and it was done in the New England Journal of Medicine. So they already at that point knew that it was detectable in aerosols for up to 3 hours. 4 hours on copper. There's reasons for that. Copper has various properties that are different from other metals. Up to 24 hours on cardboard, so that's porous surfaces there. And they're saying 2 to 3 days on plastic and stainless steel. 3 days, when we hear 2 to 3, we should automatically do 3. I have seen some studies, because again, like I said with my last video, a lot of these are repeats of studies that have already been done in first Asian institutes and later many European institutes. I've seen some studies that talk about 3 days. I've heard talk of 9. That's, again, not confirmed, although 5 days, I believe, was confirmed by at least a couple studies. So it's better to think of this thing as having minimums that we know of and maximums that we don't know of. I had also talked about, I believe it was this one in the previous video. Should load in a second here. This is referring to the MIT study that again was a replication of previous studies. Now here we had been talking about the droplets that are able to move at 10 to 30 meters per second for 7 to 8 meters. But just a little further down, for those of you that were reading the article itself, virus particles have already been found in the ventilation systems of hospital rooms of patients with coronavirus. So they're saying they were carried on turbulent clouds of air, which I would tend to call air currents. Now that's probably one of the reasons that confined areas and things like cruise ships that have HVAC systems that link all together room to room. So I would worry a little bit about hotels and possibly apartment buildings as well, have a chance of moving these small particles around. So we need to be aware of this, and we need to be concerned with this to a certain degree. Okay, so it can't intentionally move on its own. Sorry, we're down here. So these are the limits that we should be treating as minimums. This particular virus is physically kind of weak. There's some that are much tougher than this. We can destroy this guy with proper hand washing with soap. Like I said, the structure of this virus is essentially an oily bubble. So anything that would normally break down oils has a very good chance of breaking down this virus. Once you've broken down that outer bubble and the RNA has deteriorated, this is no longer an issue for us. It needs those hairs on the outside of the bubble to infect our ACE2 receptors. So rubbing alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, household cleaners, bleach, ultraviolet light, this is a big one. Not only because there are a lot of UV light disinfecting sources available on the market these days, but also because we're coming into summer and sunlight has a lot of UV. This is probably the first year that we're going to be cheering that horrible UV index that we always fear. Just for those of you playing along, I've indicated which ones are not skin friendly. Please don't put these directly on your skin. So yeah, always sunscreen in the summer. That's why, because we want to keep ourselves alive and we want to destroy this virus. So if it's got so many limitations, why is it a big deal? It's really good at its mission. That's the big deal. It has advantages. It's got a very highly variable incubation period with a high delay factor. Yes, this is where things get a little complicated. Officially, we are dealing with a 5 to 14 day window because we have removed the outlier cases, although outlier cases exist. This is partially because of the way that we do statistics in a normal rational world, which we're starting to lose track of. We would get rid of those outliers because those outliers most often just mean that something got screwed up in the test. This isn't a test like we discussed earlier. This is a situation where if we have any cases that existed outside of the normal realm that we're dealing with, we should start dealing with those cases as what we care about. Anyways, that's my little rant on the precautionary principle, and I will try to keep those at a minimum. But most often, if you are infected, you will start to show your first symptoms between 5 to 14 days after the time that you were infected. That's the normal curve on this. There are outliers, so there's a lower chance, but still a chance, that you will show your symptoms as early as 2 days after infection, or we've seen as late as 21 days after your infection. The reason that we're working officially with 5 to 14 days is we find it's a little bit difficult to isolate people for longer than 14 days, especially here in the Western world. However, we do have to keep in mind that it is entirely possible that some, not many, but some of the cases that have isolated for a 14-day period have isolated through the entire incubation period that normal people would have, and will have up to 7 more days of incubation period before they start to show symptoms. We also have the observed property of spreading while asymptomatic. Now, this is a drum that I was beating heavily in the last 2 videos, that asymptomatic spread with this virus is the biggest deal with this virus, that we don't always know that we have it, and we continue to spread it even when we don't know we have it. If you have not seen at least the shorter version of the previous video, I believe it's called Asymptomatic Spread is a Problem, please take a look at that video. It has an unknown but higher than 1 replication factor. That's that R-naught value that I talked about earlier. We're going to get into a lot more detail in this in a second, but for the moment, officially, we're calling it 2 to 3.5. To put that in perspective, the flu is 1.4, and measles, I believe, is somewhere between 12 and 14. So the flu, the average person who has the flu will infect another 1.3 people. The measles, the average person that has the measles will infect 12 to 14 other people. We're saying with COVID, it's between 2 to 3.5 other people. I say it's complicated, and we'll see some reported cases that show that we have to question these values. I'm not saying that these values are wrong. In fact, these values in some ways are scary enough as they are. But it's entirely possible that these values are higher. Has no chance of previous immunity in the population. This is another big deal. All of our other endemic viruses have been around for a while, so a certain amount of us have antibodies already present in our system, and the bulk of us have the ability to create antibodies already in our system. So if the antibodies aren't already there, our immune system has previously created antibodies for a very similar disease, and it is not working from scratch when it runs into this disease. or that disease rather. This disease, it is running from scratch. So I have maybe previous SARS cases, because this is SARS-2 for lack of a better term. They've got very similar genomes apparently. So it's possible that the SARS cases might have a little bit of immunity to this, but there's so few of them that that's not really something we should rely on, and I haven't found any data on it. It kills just few enough to be ignored at first, and enough to be unthinkable. Okay, we're going to dwell a little more on this for a second. This is the Worldometers data. Now, this hasn't been changing, so I'm pretty sure that this is what came out of the original Wuhan information. Now, you will see that it is very true that the older you get, the higher these death rates are. And when we start getting down into the 10 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 39, even the 40 to 49, these start looking like really good odds to us. We're seeing 0.2, 0.4. Just to put this in perspective, because not a lot of us look at percentages all that often, 0.2% sounds very small, but if 1,000 people get this virus, 2 of them are going to die. That's what that means. 2% would be 2 in 100. Up here we're talking 4 out of every 1,000. Now we're talking 13 out of every 1,000. 36 out of every 1,000. 80 out of every 1,000. You see where these numbers, when we put them into a human perspective, start to become very unthinkable, especially when we start thinking about how many thousands of kids are in schools. This data, like I say, is not set in stone by any stretch of the imagination. Some countries it's better, some countries it's worse. But I just want to start putting those percentage numbers into a little bit more of a human face. Yeah, so it kills just few enough to be ignored at first, and we have groups that continue to try to ignore it and to try to downplay it. But this will be unthinkable if it's not battled correctly. It has a high hospitalization rate with extended periods of intervention required. This goes back to that whole argument of it's just like the flu. Well, it's not like the flu. This is NPR. This is from March 20th. So the part that I want to really look at here is the degree of mild versus severe cases. So if we go to Worldometers again for a second, a lot of people see this on Worldometers and go, oh, well, 95% are going to be in mild condition, 5% are going to be serious or critical. Not a big deal. Mild conditions, I can deal with mild conditions. What we are showing in the data is that about 80% end up with a mild to moderate case. Mild case can be in that flu-like symptoms category. There's also part of this 80% that's actually going to be asymptomatic completely. Moderate can start to be a pretty heavy flu. If you don't believe me on that, there are lots of people that are blogging their COVID-19 self-isolation, so you can go take a look and see what you think of that. 20% are going to need some sort of hospital time. That is a lot of people for our hospital. 5% are going to need some sort of mechanical ventilation. I don't actually see that in this particular article, but that's what we're talking about when we talk serious or critical. These are people that are being assisted by a machine to be able to continue breathing. There's another 15%, so this should be 80. There should be a 15 in the middle here that are taking up a hospital bed, or at least taking up some hospital time. So the numbers, when we're dealing with 20% of people that get infected need some hospital time, suddenly puts into perspective why we are trying to flatten this curve, because hospitals don't have that much space. I live in Ottawa. Ottawa just recently celebrated its 1 million population mark. It's a really good number for easy math to be able to start looking at what some of these percentages really mean. And lastly, I put here that it takes advantage of humanity's greatest shortcoming, according to Albert Allen Bartlett. I think that's very true. We'll get a little bit into that in a second. I think that it's also true that it takes advantage of a lot of humanity's shortcomings, and it, like I said earlier, it takes a lot of our strengths and turns them into weaknesses. So we're going to move on to the R-naught value. This is a key concept that we really do need to understand. It's been kind of deemed as complicated in the media because it's not a constant. So it's not the type thing that we can just splash a given number up in all the headlines. It makes a really bad soundbite. But because it's not a constant, it means that the things we do change its value. So we can actually change this thing. And that is an important message to get out, that we can change the course of things based on the actions that we have. I know that that is already being blasted out, but I want to explain why and how we make those changes. So first off, we need to know that all R-naught values that we assign to a novel disease are full-out estimates, because we don't know. The natural R-naught value of any given disease is the transmissibility of the disease if no precautions are taken. We don't know with this disease right now because we're all taking precautions. We're all kind of taking all kinds of different precautions. So the R-naught's going to be drastically different from country to country, even from area to area within any given country. We won't really know a natural R-naught for this particular disease for probably another year or two once we start to really crunch some numbers. But it doesn't really matter right now. We just need to know that all of those numbers are estimates. They're the best guess that we have at the moment because this thing is brand new. However, any value of R-naught that is above 1 becomes exponential. That's important to know. So we are working with a 2.5 to 3 range. That's above 1, so that's why we have this exponential growth. I put it here as if we have an R-naught that's less than 1, and that can be 0.99, we have the genie in the bottle. I'll explain why in 1 second. If we have an R-naught that's between 1 and 1.5, then we actually have a chance of keeping control. Now, for the flu, the R-naught that we assign to that is 1.3, and to a degree, a large degree, we have the flu under control. It tends not to become giant outbreaks in our population. Now, that's mostly due to vaccines and to natural herd immunity because it's been around so long. But if we can push this down below 1.5, we can really start to get a handle on things. If we can get down below 1, we have won the battle for the time being. Okay, if it's above 1.5, then things get moving and they can get really bad really quick. So before we go anywhere else, we're going to take a quick look at a couple things here. This is a chart that I yanked out of a YouTube video by a man named Tom Britton. He's a mathematician and statistician out of University of Stockholm, I believe. Don't hold that to me, or don't hold me to that, but I will put links to his video in the description below. This is a chart that he's created that gives us a pretty good estimate based on the R-naught value of any given disease, how much of the population, so this is 0% up to 100%, how much of the population it will get infected before the disease fizzles out, which is another way of saying that how many people will get infected before herd immunity comes into effect and stops the virus from being able to spread because it keeps hitting people that already have the antibodies. So it's a little hard to see what's going on here. But once we hit an R-naught of 1, that's when things start getting exponential. That's when things start to grow. Once we get to an R-naught of 2, that's where we get about that 80% figure that we see in the news all the time, that we will have herd immunity when we're at 80%. Now, if we're at 2.5, that's actually a little closer to 90, you'll notice here. And 3, then we're probably closer to 90, 92, not quite 95 yet. And as we get closer to 5, we get closer and closer to 100%. And the bigger this gets, the closer that gets to 100%. Now, I doubt it would ever actually touch 100%. That would be kind of the wonderful theoretical area of math games. But it's going to get pretty close if the R-naught factor is actually that high. This particular chart, the big caveat that Tom Britton gives, is that it's based on the idea that there is no natural immunity in the population. No one has antibodies, no one can avoid the virus. So in almost any other situation, this chart would be lying. In this situation, this chart is pretty close to telling the truth, because like we said, this is a novel virus with pretty much no one that has natural immunity out there, with the faint exception of the SARS-1 patients. So now, we are going to take a quick look at the R-naught value, not the RO value. There we go. So R-naught over 5 generations. This should make sense when you get a handle on it. So this is your patient 0. It's a disease that has an R-naught of 0.5. So within 5 generations, we're guaranteed to get a 0 somewhere. So patient 1 infects 1 more person, infects 1 more person, infects 1 more person, infects 1 more person, but eventually that 50% ratio is going to give us a 0. That's why this holds true even if we make this 0.9, we'd have to go out to 10 generations, and again, these are oversimplifications, the whole idea of how many times, like how many heads or tails when you flip a coin. But if it's below 1, eventually there will be someone in this chain, because they're only infecting 1 new person at a time. Eventually there'll be someone in this chain that doesn't get a chance to infect someone else, and the virus or disease or whatever doesn't get a new generation. It dies out along that chain. Now, in the case that we have 1, like straight up 1, it will just continue 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, which is why if I really zoomed in on this chart, it's at 1.00001 that this line starts shooting up. 1 itself stays at 0. 1.5. This is where we start to see the chances of exponential growth really starting to get big. Because every once in a while they're only going to have 1 that they infect. Other times they're going to infect 2. Those 2 in turn infect 1 each, but maybe 1 of them infects 2 and 1 of them only infects 1, and things can start to snowball here. It's a slow snowball. It's the type snowball that we can still get a handle on, but it will eventually start to snowball, hence why we call this exponential growth. 2, an R-naught of 2 is as far as our brain really comfortably wraps around exponential growth, because this is binary. We all know binary, so we're going to go 2-bit, 4-bit, 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit, so on and so forth. It's growth that our mind is comfortable to expect. The problem comes in when it really gets exponential. So R-naught of 3. We've got 3, 9, 27, excuse me a second. See, we all clear our throats eventually. That's why we wear face masks in public. So 3, 9, 27, 81, 243. So by 5th generation, that 1 patient 1 has been responsible for 243 instead of 32 infections. R-naught of 4, the numbers start jumping really quick. They get out of hand in our brains because we keep thinking that it should be a progression that we'll understand. And we will understand it, it's just multiplying by 4 each time. But that 256 to 1024 tends to catch us off guard. R-naught of 5, 3125 by the 5th generation. R-naught of 7, up to 16,807 after 5 generations. And an R-naught of 12. This is where measles gets out of hand really, really quick. Luckily, most of us are vaccinated to measles. So this is where our brains have trouble with the exponential function. And this is what Bartlett was talking about. Okay, so the R-naught value is made up of various components. The raw transmissibility of the virus with no precautions taken. That's what I was talking about as an estimate at the moment, because we really don't know. But we can look at some interesting cases here, because we have to figure out what exactly is going on in these cases. Now my computer's going to take its sweet time loading them up because I haven't looked at them in a while and they've been sitting here. But some of you may already know of these incidents. Now I believe all of these, with the exception of one, is Canadian news. Again, I'm in Canada. So back in... This is from March 23rd, but the event itself, I believe, took place quite a while back. This was a North Vancouver Pacific Dental Conference. It was held at the Vancouver Convention Center. So yes, March 5th to 7th. That particular event is now responsible for 20 people in BC who attended the conference, as well as a dozen others from outside the province who have all tested positive for the virus. So that gives us 32 people from one single event. If we assume that only one person was infected at the beginning of the event, then the R-naught value for that particular instance would be 32. If we have 2 people that were at the event, then we'd cut that in half. 4 people, we'd cut it into 4, so on and so forth. So if we're playing with an R-naught value of 2, then we need to have, 16 people at that event that were already infected before the event. Again, this is not telling us what the natural value of transmissibility for this disease is on its own, because again, these are people that are in extra close quarters. But it does tell us that we have to worry that it might be in one of those really scary exponential zones. Edmonton curling tournament became a hotspot for COVID-19. Now these were doctors, believe it or not. They all got together in Edmonton to do some curling. It's an annual tournament. If we zip down here, by Sunday, March 15th, the world had changed. As of March 27th, at least 24 of the roughly 72 attendees of the Bonspiel have tested positive for COVID-19. So again, we've got a large number here, and in order to keep the R-naught value something manageable, we have to assume that there's a number of people that came to this event with the disease. St. John's Funeral Home, mini epicenter. We have more than 60 cases traced to 2 wakes, but if we zip down here a little bit, funeral wakes both overlapped on Sunday, March 15th, and we now have traced more than 60 of the province's 82 cases to that funeral home, to that event. So again, how many people are we willing to assume came to that event with symptoms or as asymptomatic carriers? Because that will affect the R-naught value. last one I'm going to throw up here is Los Angeles Times. This is a choir decided to go ahead with a rehearsal. Now, this is interesting in two ways. The number of people infected from this one event is kind of shocking. So we'll start with that. 60 singers showed up to this rehearsal, and 3 weeks later, 45 have been diagnosed. I believe that's including the 2 dead, not as well as the 2 dead, but I'm not entirely sure. So, how many of the choir members showed up to this rehearsal with the virus? The other thing to think about is, in the case of a choir rehearsal, these are people that are moving an expanded amount of air in and out of their lungs for an extended amount of time. So that aerosolization factor could be something that's going on here as well. Again, I'm not drawing any solid conclusions from this, but it does make us wonder what that A value is. Now, B is the length of the contagious period. That, again, is an unknown right now. We do have pretty good evidence to show that people, A, are able to be asymptomatic and be contagious. So right there, that's a big red flag. We also have a lot of data showing that people are contagious before they start to show their symptoms. That's the people that will be showing symptoms throughout the disease. So that, I think the last number I saw was 2.5 days is what we're working with. But because we have asymptomatic carriers, that's not necessarily the case. There's some people that through the full course of their disease will be contagious and not showing symptoms. There's also discussion about the possibility of a contagious period lasting beyond the symptoms. We just don't know. It's not common in diseases, but we don't know. The prevalence of prior immunity in the population, pretty much bupkis here. And the steps taken to reduce the infection risk. Now, these are the ones that we have control. These are the things that we can do something about. So for our current situation, only estimates are available for A. The range is wide, and we just considered some known examples. Only estimates are available for B. The range is wide, and we should be assuming the worst case. For C, incredibly low, if any, maybe the SARS survivors or random gene pool. There might be something in some people's genes that just make them naturally immune to this. As far as the SARS survivors, just to put everything into perspective here, at this point we have a situation where this current disease, COVID-19, has killed considerably more people than SARS-1 ever managed to infect. And D is the pandemic response. That's what we control. That's what we can do about this. And as I said in the topics originally, the pandemic response is an equation. It's 3 main parts that act together on this. The main parts are testing, treatment, and transmission reduction. And think of them like legs on a stool. If one is too short, we're going to have problems. The reason I like equations better is if one of these is not up to snuff, then the other 2 have to take on additional roles. So testing is that we test every suspected case. We're not doing that in North America. We have a testing issue. We have a bottleneck for the actual machines that do the tests of the kits, and we have a supply issue with the kits themselves. Quarantine and contact trace every positive case. This is what was done in a lot of the Asian nations that have a lot more experience dealing with these type highly contagious respiratory diseases. This is not something that we've done in North America for both political and societal reasons, as well as simply manpower. Ideally, anytime we find a positive case, what we should be doing is quarantining that individual and keeping them under observation, and then isolating all of the case contacts. The people that case has seen, whether they're showing any symptoms or not, we isolate them and we keep them under observation for the entire incubation period. So if we were to do containment for the entire country, which some countries have successfully kept in the containment strategy, remember we've moved on to reduction strategy now. The containment strategy would have included stopping everyone entering the border by land, sea, or air, and keeping them in a isolation or quarantine situation for the incubation period before letting them into the country. That can be done. That has been done by some countries. It would have been very difficult for us to do here in the West, which is one of the reasons that we jumped straight over to the reduction phase and kind of gave up on containment pretty quickly. Mass testing for the public in known community spread areas, and honestly in all areas. We, again, can't do this right now. We don't have enough tests for it. Here in Canada, Quebec has been doing a good job of trying to do this. That's one of the reasons that they look in our media to be the real hot spot in Canada. A lot of that is due to the difference in testing. They're testing more than anyone else in Canada, therefore they have more numbers on paper. We're not testing in most other provinces, especially not in Ontario where I live, not to the degree that we need to be, so our paper count looks lower than it actually is. And then there's antibody and antigen testing. So antigen testing is what we're doing right now. That's testing for the virus itself. So we're looking for the offending little piece of RNA. Antibody testing, which we don't do widespread in Canada as of yet because we don't have a cheap available test. Although I was seeing on Dr. John's video this morning that I believe it's Thailand that has a little antibody test that's a quick little blood test, very similar very similar in look and design to a pregnancy test. Just instead of using pee, it's using a drop of blood, and it's going to give you either a line or no line. I'm not entirely sure which, if you do or don't have the virus. Antibody tests check for the antibodies that our immune systems create when they manage to fight off the disease. So these tests are going to be much more useful than antigen tests once we have them widely available at a effective price to be able to fully mass produce these things. Because then we can test the entire population and find out who's already had it and has the antibodies, which should, in theory, make them immune to getting the disease again, at least for a time period. We have no idea how long that time period will be yet, but we're pretty confident that if this acts like pretty much every other virus on the planet, there's going to be a considerable length of time where the antibody resistance in our system will be sufficient to fight off reinfection. Okay, treatment. That is our entire medical system. Any new therapies that we think up during this process, this is the last line of defense. It is not our first line of defense. I talked about this in video number 1. We don't send our medics to the front lines alone. We, the people, are the front lines here. It's time for us to start figuring out how to be effective at that job. So yeah, if we get any therapies of any sort, that's going to be in the treatment area. If we get any vaccines of any sort, that's going to be down in the transmission reduction area. So just quickly pointing that out, that therapies are this leg, vaccine is this leg. So our entire medical system is about to be very stressed. We're all painfully aware of this. I talked heavily in the last video that if anyone has any medical grade equipment that they can send to hospitals, now is the time to do it. Face masks that I'm talking about at any point that I talk about them in this video is not the N95 masks. It is not professionally made masks. It is not anything that's even industrial grade professionally made masks. All of those are needed by our medical professionals here in North America. We will deal with the shortage and why it happened later. Right now, we are just going to deal with the shortage with everything we have. When I talk about face masks for the public, I'm talking about cotton face masks that can be made at home out of readily available fabrics. For more details, please look at my previous video on that, but I just wanted to be clear on that because I'm bound to talk about face masks again. Transmission reduction. This is everything that we do as a society to reduce the spread. So keeping physical distance, that's our social distancing or physical distancing, whichever term you prefer. Personal hygiene, being aware of transmission risks. This is the informed public. This is probably the important part, because as long as we're uninformed, we will continue spreading this and not even realize we're doing something wrong. Wear a mask. Right away. I knew I'd talk about it again. These are cotton face masks that we make at home. Have lots of them. Have one clean one on your face at all times in public. Have extra clean ones in your pocket to be able to replace the clean one on your face if you cough or sneeze, or if anyone does so in your direction. The dirty one, this is important, has to be trapped into some sort of bag or something where it will be contained. You can throw them out if you have enough of them to do so. I personally would suggest get a poop bag for doggies. Put all your masks in that. When you get home, throw them into the washing machine. We know soap will kill this. We know that we have no human lungs in the washing machine, and we shouldn't be throwing things out right now. General cleanliness, that goes with the personal hygiene, but I'm more talking about surfaces, both public and private. We should be washing everything we bring into our homes right now. Disinfecting, we want to keep our home a safe space where we can be comfortable. Eat healthy food. That's always good advice, but immune systems tend to work better when the person that they are trying to protect are healthy. So exercise, eat healthy food, get fresh air, reduce risky behavior. This is both in the aspect of your healthiest self, as well as in the aspect of we don't want to give any more work to these guys. They are going to be busy, and we don't want to be making them any busier. So that includes don't speed on the highway, don't get in fist fights, don't be an idiot, don't try to climb on top of buildings right now, don't try to get that perfect Instagram picture or whatever it is that people were doing and walking off of cliffs. Like, this is not the time for that. We need to reduce the amount of people in hospital for reasons other than this disease, because this disease in and of itself is about to give our medical system a year's worth of work in an uncomfortably short period of time. Now we get into the things that governments do. Lockdowns, closing of borders. Self-isolation, social distancing is when they're being nice about it, and when they get fed up, that's when we get into the lockdowns, the rules, the laws, the fines, all of that stuff. If you don't believe me, take a good look at Europe and ask them how serious that is. Also, if you don't believe me, currently we have the Quarantine Act here in Canada, so anyone who's coming in from out of the country, is what's currently the rules, will self-isolate for 14 days. If they violate that, the current fine is $750,000. So yeah, the governments are getting to the point of no longer messing around. And yeah, anything and everything that we can do to reduce the help that we give to this thing. We are the ones that are carrying it around. Virus doesn't spread, people spread the virus. It's just a burr, it's a seed, it's not doing this all on its own. We are giving it all the help it needs. If we stop doing that, this problem gets a lot better, a lot quicker. Okay, again, all three parts work together. Therefore, if one is reduced for any reason, the others must take up the slack. And this is where it's time for honesty, and here's the real problem. Our healthcare system is already strained. It was before this event started. We all know it, and we can pass blame around about it later. Just right now, don't be cruel enough to expect them to do this all by themselves. We have been very cruel in the Western world to our healthcare systems. We do not give them the credit and the appreciation that they deserve, and they are about to be gigantic heroes throughout this. They're not going to be able to save us all. They're not going to be able to work miracles, although they will do something that is incredibly close. But for us not to back them up, that would be cruelty on a level that I don't even think Western society is able to do. Like, there's individualism, and then there's just being a dick. Let's avoid that second one. We don't have enough tests. Again, we all know it. We can pass blame about it later. Right now, there are a lot of things that we just don't have enough of. That's the hand that we've been dealt, and we are going to figure out how to deal with it. So right away, we've taken two of the legs of our equation, and we've basically constrained them. We waited too long to inform the public. We'll all know it soon, and we can pass blame about it later. But it's better late than never. We are not children, we are not idiots, we're just uninformed. And I strongly believe that an informed and motivated and mobilized public is a strong thing, and definitely stronger than any virus. So that's our job right now. We have to inform everyone, we have to explain what's going on, why it's going on, and how our actions are helping this get worse. And how our actions changed just slightly can help this to get better. So what do we do now? Everything we can possibly think of. Every idea is on the table right now. Our governments are doing what they can, but we can't let them do this all by themselves because we haven't trusted them before this. Why are we trusting them with everything now? Like, really think about that. How many people last year complained that the government was full of idiots that never get anything done right? Now, we're suddenly cowering in our rooms, waiting for the government to solve our problems. This is not exactly a recipe for wonderful things to happen. So, it's time for us to pool our ideas. We've got lots of them. We are not stupid people. We're just people. All people have ideas. Time to start letting them out. Top 3 needs are face masks for everyone. So I did my whole chant of sew, learn to sew, get other people to sew. As much support for our medical staff as we can possibly give. That includes, like I said, any equipment that we may have that's available, clean, and can be used by them, give it to them, please, they need it. But that also means support. Like, some people think that it's a stunt that in England right now they're clapping for in unison, well, not in unison, all together. They're doing an Earth Hour type thing for the NHS. That's the National Health Service. Those things matter. Morale matters. If you have kids, get your kids to write letters for hospital staff that we can send to the hospital, because letters from kids are a morale booster. We need to do everything we can to show our appreciation to these people, because they're about to go through hell. And they are going to need that emotional support and know that we value the things that they're doing. And inform everyone of why we're doing what we're doing. Like, none of this is overly complicated if we spend the time to explain it. So, where we're at now, and unfortunately this isn't going to be all that pretty. We're fighting blind. That's because we don't have the testing. So we're mostly only testing cases with the obvious symptoms or high risk. So because we know that there's asymptomatic spread, we need to be testing everyone to know where the virus is. This is the whole idea of an invisible enemy. And I don't know too many militaries in the world that would be willing to fight an invisible enemy. We have tools to make this no longer invisible. Now, the fix for this is the government is trying to get more testing potential. There's work being done there. It's not something we, the public, are going to be able to change, but there is definite work being done there. We will have more tests. We will have antibody tests. We have to be ready when those exist to be able to take advantage of them. But in the time in between, us, the public, we use our reduction tactics. We use our face masks. We use our cleanliness. We use our distance. We can tack on our information in that. We have to let everyone everyone know why we're doing what we're doing and get everyone on board. There's community spread. That's a problem. The virus, largely through its long incubation period and that asymptomatic spread potential, has made it into the public. And because we're fighting blind, we don't know where that is. And like we saw in previous instances, this has the potential to have a very high transmission factor. So we need to do something about it. And right now the governments are using lockdown tactics. They're currently voluntary here in most of North America. They're going to ramp up to mandatory. We as the public can use our reduction tactics. So again, face masks, cleanliness, distance, and information. We also can't fight the lockdown tactics. I'm not going to get too deep into any of this right now, but eventually I'm probably going to do a video dealing with the conspiracy theory side of things. I know that there's word going around in certain circles that this is some sort of planned takeover. I know that there's word going around that this is some sort of man-made virus. The whole Event 201, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. I'm aware of all of these possibilities. I don't flippantly say that I don't think that they're what's happening. I do think that they're worth discussing, so eventually I will. This isn't the time. Right now, regardless of how this situation happened, it's the situation we're in, and the only tactics that are going to work to get that genie back in the bottle so that we can get down to an R-naught that is manageable is lockdown tactics. If we can pull it off voluntarily and we all agree to spend a minimum of 2 weeks, which is our minimum incubation period that we should be playing with here, all at home, all away from one another, all with our face masks if we happen to have to be outside interacting with one another. If we can do that voluntarily, that is wonderful. If we can't fight the lockdown. We need the lockdown to happen because it has to happen either voluntarily or it has to happen mandatory. Until such time as we can get this under control, the community spread side of things, that is going to have to happen. Okay, there's a lack of face masks for the medical system and none at all for the public. The issue, best and easiest solution to the spread reduction is is to wear a mask, and the solution is going to be for the government to buy more and compel industry to make more, which we're effectively doing. The States has brought in the War Measures Production Act, so they can actually just simply tell their companies what to do. We haven't yet done an equivalent thing in Canada, but we're getting very, very close. I think the difference is in Canada that particular part of the Act is tied to the entire War Measures Act, which is not even called that anymore now. It's the State of Emergency Act or something like that. Anyways, and I think that our current Prime Minister is worried that some people might compare him with his father. I don't think he should be worried about that. I think if I'm reading the tea leaves right of the way the social mood is on that, if anything, we are comparing him to his father and wishing he was more like him right now, just in case he happens to be listening. As we discussed in yesterday's video, even a homemade cotton mask will reduce the spread. It will filter out at least some of the air that's coming into the lungs, so that's when we talked about a reduced viral load from cotton face masks, or any face masks, or literally anything in front of your face. Please see the previous video. Catching the majority of droplets from coughs and sneezes, so anyone who's asymptomatic, the majority of those coughs and sneezes get stuck in the mask, and if we're using proper mask etiquette of removing our mask, putting it into a booby bag, taking a new mask, putting the new mask on our face, then we have captured the droplets from that. They're not going anywhere, they're not going to anyone's lungs, they're just going to the washing machine. Putting a physical barrier between our mouths, noses, and our hands. And we discussed that in more detail in yesterday's video. I know that there is an attempt from certain sections of the official community to say that that is not the case. I encourage you to see yesterday's video because I ranted enough about that then. The fix. Yeah, the government will buy more, will compel industry to make more. The public, we send all of our good ones to hospital staff. And we make lots and lots of the cheap little homemade ones. We make tons of them because we need some for ourselves, we need some for our friends. The faster we can get at least 5 of these per person, the faster we can get done with the lockdown tactics and stuff like that, because we won't be quite as afraid to let the public back out when we know that they won't be coughing on one another. Measures that we need to take are going to wreak havoc on the economy. This is one of the unfortunate parts of the way that our economy is set up. To save lives, we all need to stay home until the growth slows down. That's 2 weeks minimum from the time that everyone gets with the program. So we need to stop the spread, and then we need to outweight the people that are already infected. That's going to take time, and we reset the clock on that time frame every time new infections happen. This is going to be difficult, if not deadly, to a lot of businesses in our current economy. So the government is going to do everything possible to keep the system running. They're doing that right now. In some ways I agree with, in other ways I disagree with. As a public, we're just going to have to get by on this. We hedge against inflation wherever it's possible. I have been encouraging my friends for a very long time to grow their own food. I think that it's a good idea to do for other reasons other than the COVID virus. I think that we as a society have gotten a little bit dependent on centralized systems and have lost the ability to be self-sufficient in pretty much anything these days. So this can be a chance for us to learn how to make things, grow things, create things, get skills that we didn't have before. We have opportunities here, and we can become less dependent on that system, and that can be a long-term change, and it might be worth finding out just what we're really made of, because we've forgotten that although work can be difficult, work can also be worthwhile. Right now, a lot of people are figuring that out with cooking at home, that it tastes better when you cook it yourself because you get to control things. It tastes even better if you grow it yourself, and I invite you guys to give it a shot. It's not that hard. There's lots of videos out there. Okay, here's the biggie. Nothing, and I literally mean nothing, that we do today can change the next 2 to 3 weeks. This is definitely the hardest thing for our minds to wrap around. This is because of the long incubation period. This is because of how easily it spreads around. And the next 2 weeks are really kind of set in stone. Anyone who is infected right now will remain infected until they either get over it or they die. Some of those are going to be lucky people that are asymptomatic. Hopefully they're going to be staying at home and not spraying it around the community. Some of those people are going to be unlucky. This is not the flu. This is considerably worse than the flu. This gets considerably worse than the flu as soon as the healthcare system in any given area gets overrun. And we already discussed the problems that healthcare is expecting. So we need to recognize that the changes we make right now are not going to be apparent immediately. The changes we make right now are changes that will start to come into effect 2 to 3, maybe even 4 weeks from now. And if we don't do them now, then the changes we do tomorrow will be coming into effect 2 to 3 to 4 weeks from then. There's nothing we can do about the current infections. We can only stop the future ones. So even if every single person in the country, the world, wherever, were to follow all the right steps right now, things are still going to get worse before they get better. And it's hard to live with, but it's what it is, and I'm sorry there's no fix for this This is one of those situations where we just have to learn to accept it. Almost all of our natural reactions to a crisis are the wrong ones to use in this. We talked about this a little bit in the last video. We naturally pull together. We tend to find comfort and security in groups. And for this one, we need physical distance. We do need that emotional togetherness. We should be incredibly thankful that we have the internet in our world right now. We have the ability to communicate. We have the ability to see one another without ever stepping out of our homes. So we have the path to keep that emotional togetherness even while we have the physical distance. But we do have to think before we run to the rescue, because in this one it's not always going to be the right path. Again, we discussed that in a little more detail in the first video, part 1 of this series. So the fix, we must be careful to think through all of our instincts before acting on them, and be sure that they're actually going to help in the way that we want them to. And yeah, these last two are really going to be the most difficult for us to get a handle on and cope with. Because things will get worse before they get better. But as long as we do our part, they will get better. We have to do our part for them to get better, though. And the longer we wait to do that part, the longer it will be before anything gets better, and the considerably worse it will get along the way. So this is not a procrastination time, which I personally find incredibly difficult because my life has been procrastination. But this is the time to do our part, whatever that part may be. So the response we need as a public. We already know what needs to be done on this. We just finished discussing it. If we work together before it's not too late, we can do that. So right now we need face masks for everyone. Make your own. Make them custom. Make them pretty. Make them your fashion statement. Wear different ones every hour. I don't care. Just make them. Grow a garden. No matter what, it's healthy. It's also good for your soul. Working with soil is something that we've lost in the modern world, and we should really get back to a little bit. I personally would say it's probably a better hedge against inflation to grow edible plants. However, flower gardens will still give you that connection to nature that we all need right now. So grow anything. Grow pot. I don't care. Just grow something. Offer what skills you have. Everyone is good at something. We probably are going to have to offer them over the internet, but again, we've got YouTube. It's already got a ton of information out there. If there's any skill that you've ever wanted to learn, ask YouTube. It'll tell you how. And if you can't find the skill that you happen to be good at out there already, or if you find that whoever's showing it is not as good as you, make your own videos. We have options here. We have time. We should start marrying those two together and making something good. Help those in need. Everyone, everywhere. We're in this together. It's not physical help that we can give right now, but any help we can give, we all need to give to one another. We need to make every decision count, and our healthcare workers deserve that. That is the absolute least we can do right now. Learn new skills. We have the time. Be kind to everyone, even the ones you don't like. This is going to be bad, and be ready to help out those that need it, because we're all going to need a little bit of help from someone else throughout this period. Soon, we are going to flatten out this curve in one way or another. And then we can start the limited public life. We're going to need masks. So again, face masks for everyone. Make your own. Craft for kids. Come on, we can do this. Multiple masks. And once we have that antibody test, we can start getting back to work. And as soon as that's available, get tested as soon as you can. especially if you have had symptoms throughout this whole experience that seem like COVID and you've recovered. Because if you have antibodies, you will be able to go back out in public and run a normal life, and we can start getting the economy going again. So we need to keep an eye on the news on that. And like I said, good things out of, I believe it was Thailand. So keep an eye out. Secret to life in a COVID world. Now, this is a little presumptuous of me, I'm sure, but these 3 steps will really start. If we can all do this, we will immediately make a better COVID world. We have to assume that we have the virus right now. We have to assume that we do not want to spread it to anyone else, and we have to act accordingly all the time, no exceptions. That and that alone will slow down the spread of this thing to the point that we can start to really deal with it. So how do we get through this? We make our home a safe zone. You disinfect everything you bring into the home. Again, that doesn't need to be complicated. We went over the multitude of things that we can use as cleaners. If you're really the lazy type like I am, you can wait for sunny days and leave stuff outside in the sun. Just make sure to move it around if there's any sides that are shaded. Changing your clothes when you get back, at least the outer layers, is not a horrible idea. The chances are very low with clothes because, like most birds, once they get into clothes, they don't really like to get out without a hell of a lot of effort. But, again, precautionary principle. It's not a bad idea, and if you have the time to do it, do it. Don't let anyone into your home that you don't live with. I'm sorry, friends. I love you all. You're not going to be seeing me in person for a little while. It's just how it is. We do need to have a safe zone for our own mental stability, and the home is our safe zone. So we need to really put our foot down on that. So that also includes family that we don't live with on a normal daily basis. This is for 2 reasons. We don't want to spread the virus around. We don't want to get it into our safe area. And in the off chance that our safe area is infected and we don't know it, we don't want to potentially infect anyone else. So as difficult as that may be, that is a rule that we're really going to have to keep in mind. And stay home. If it's not life or death, it is not worth it right now. The government advice on that one is very true. It needs to be essential to you in some way to make it worth it at the moment. This will change over time, but for the time being, remember, things are going to get considerably worse before they get better, so we can't start living in the fiction that we're already over the hump and things are getting better. It's unfortunately not the case, and video 3 is going to detail that in more detail than I really want to do. Number 2, treat all environments and surfaces outside the home as infected. We wash our hands regularly throughout the day. We use hand sanitizer if we don't have washing facilities. We avoid touching our face. We avoid touching any surface unless it's necessary. Then we wash our hands or we use hand sanitizer. The face, we wear a mask in public. Avoid any public place that you don't need to go. If you really don't need to go into that store and you see 80 people in that store, don't go into that store, especially not if you're not wearing a mask, because you can't be too safe in this situation. And acting on the cautionary side is always acting on Team Human here. Acting on the impatient side tends to be acting on Team Virus. Here's one that I noticed. There's some videos out of Wuhan. There's, I believe it's Channel 4 in London, so London, England, who has a few videos up by a young woman in Wuhan that's been kind of giving people a window into life there. And she was using a pen to hit buttons on elevators, but this would be just as easy to use on walk signals outside, stuff like that. Cautions are, keep in mind that once that end of that pen or stylus or whatever has touched a foreign surface, it also needs to be washed. So just throwing an idea out, but maybe a Ziploc bag with a Lysol wipe in the bottom of it, and you could pop the thing back in there when it's not in use. I don't know. There's got to be something easier than that, but I'm just throwing ideas out there. Just keep in mind, anything that we touch a foreign surface with, whether it's our hand or not, has to be cleaned before it gets anywhere near our face or into our safe zone. Be especially careful in enclosed public spaces. The choir example lets us know why that's the case. Number 3, help where and how you can. We all have something we can give in this situation. Be conscious of every action and how it's going to impact on others. This is a situation where us being such an individualistic society is a bit of a weakness here. We need to think of one another, and that's partially, I think, this is my own opinion, but I do think that that's one of the reasons that Asian nations have done a little bit better in this. As a society, they think of the whole as well as thinking of the singular. That doesn't necessarily mean I think that the whole should be thought of above the singular, but I definitely think that we have to be able to look at both levels, especially in this situation. Stay safe. Hospitals will be busy enough without us being stupid. This cannot be said enough right now. Be prepared for this to take a while and help others get through that fact. That's already starting to become more and more apparent in the news. We're seeing timelines that used to be end of April get pushed to end of June. Do not be surprised if you're in Ontario and you hear that your kids won't be going back to school this school year, and we'll think about it again in September. In fact, I'm surprised anywhere in Canada is still pushing the idea that we will think about this before September. It's just the world we live in right now. Help make sure information spreads faster than the virus. We can do it. We got the internet. We can spread this as fast as light. We are the front lines of this battle. It's time to shape up and fight. We talked yesterday about the public being the front lines here. We're the infantry. We should not be leaving this all to our medics. We should be informed. We should be armed with cleaners. We should be armed with face masks. We have a role. Help spread the word. We can all be active in sharing information that will fight the fear, and we all explain things differently, so maybe your voice will reach someone that other voices haven't been able to yet. And make slogans. Like, I am horribly bad at social media. It has always been my Achilles heel, but if there's anyone out there that's good at making stuff like memes, like, here's some slogans that you can feel free to take and plaster wherever you want. Team Humanity versus Team Virus. Whose side are you on? It's not after us. It's just hitching a ride. Let's put just hitching a ride. Hello, computer. I swear I typed that. Thank you. Face masks for all. Proper pandemic preparedness presumes precaution principle. This should replace Peter Pepper and his peck of pickled peppers, in my opinion. Spread knowledge, not viruses. Very good advice. An informed and motivated public is stronger than any bug. And for those of the Christian persuasion, let's try onward informed soldiers marching as to war. With face masks upon us, we fear the cough no more. I am sure that some of you out there can do better slogans than this. I'm just throwing out some ideas. Please, we all have a part to play. We can all make a difference here. Share information, share ideas, share ways that we're going to get through this with our sanity intact from being inside too long, and with our society intact from not losing as many people as we could otherwise. This is a situation that none of us ever wanted to be in, but it's a situation we're in nonetheless. So thank you for listening if you've listened through this whole long rant. I do promise to try to make shorter segments of this video, as well as as short, little expanded ideas here and there from this video. And video 3 will be out as soon as I can. It will likely be a lot shorter than this one, but it will also be information packed, and I wish I could tell you guys that it was a happy one. It won't be, but we are going to hold on to hope that the steps that we take today will change the future, even if we have to step through some uncomfortable moments on that path. So thank you all for listening. Stay safe. I will link everything I've talked about in the description bar below. Like I said, I will try to put in timestamps in the description bar below. And I will talk to you guys all soon. Yeah, stay safe, take care, be kind to everyone. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon, guys.